In the late 1960s, Detroit didn't sleep. On Thursday nights, Woodward Avenue turned into a proving ground. Factory engineers by day, street racers by night, and in the middle of it all, there was one car nobody could beat. It wasn't loud. It didn't advertise itself. It just won. Again and again and again. And then, for nearly 20 years, the most feared car on Woodward Avenue simply disappeared. Some said it was destroyed. Others said it was locked away in a private collection. A few claimed it never existed at all. Just a story that grew louder with every retelling. But one man knew it was real. He'd watched it race, and he spent 30 years hunting it down. This is the story of the hunt for the silver bullet.
So this car here is the king of Woodward Avenue.
Woodward Avenue in the late 1960s wasn't just a street, it was a battlefield. 16 miles of wide, straight pavement running north from downtown Detroit through suburbs like Royal Oak, Birmingham, and Pontiac. During the day, it carried normal traffic, families, commuters, people going about their lives, but at night, it belonged to someone else. Every Thursday night, the serious players met at Howard Johnson's just north of Detroit. Not the weekend warriors with bolt-on parts and big mouths, the real players, factory engineers who worked at GM, Ford, and Chrysler during the day and tested their ideas on the street at night. Professional mechanics with access to parts that weren't in any catalog. Street racers with deep pockets who'd bet thousands on a single race. They weren't there to cruise, they weren't there to show off, they were there to bet money, settle scores, and prove whose engineering was better. The cars that showed up weren't normal. These were GTOs running secret Pontiac parts that wouldn't reach production for another year. Mustangs with Ford's experimental hardware, Chevelles powered by pieces that dealers didn't even know existed. The manufacturers knew exactly what was happening, and they encouraged it, because winning on the drag strip sold cars to racers. But winning on Woodward sold cars to everyone else. When a kid saw a Plymouth destroy a Chevelle at a stoplight, he remembered that when he walked into a dealership. Chrysler had a problem though. Their 4.26 Hemi engine dominated professional drag racing. Richard Petty was winning NASCAR races with it. Don Garlits was setting records in top fuel. The Hemi was building Chrysler's performance reputation in competition. But on the street, where it mattered for actual sales, they were getting beaten. The Hemi was expensive. It cost more than many people's annual salary. It was hard to tune. It required constant maintenance. And it intimidated regular buyers who just wanted a fast car, not a science project. Meanwhile, Chevy and Ford were putting fast, affordable cars in the hands of kids with cash. Cars that were easier to drive, easier to maintain, and easier to live with. Chrysler needed to prove the Hemi could dominate on the street, not just the track, but they couldn't do it officially. Factory-sponsored street racing would create legal problems and bad publicity. So they decided to do it unofficially. A group inside Chrysler's racing department decided to fix this. The team included Bob Cahill, a veteran racing strategist, Tom Hoover, the engineer who developed the 4.26 Hemi, and Dick Maxwell from the Ramchargers, Chrysler's legendary factory-backed drag racing team. Their solution was radical. Build a street car so dominant that nothing else could touch it. Make it look stock enough that buyers would think they could buy one from a dealer. Then put it in the hands of someone who could drive it and keep Chrysler's involvement invisible. They needed a frontman. Someone good enough to win consistently, but smart enough to keep quiet about where the car really came from. They chose Jimmy Addison. Addison worked at Ted Spare's Sunoco station on Woodward Avenue, just south of 14 Mile Road, right in the center of the action. He was known as a quiet, methodical mechanic, the kind who built cars correctly instead of quickly. He He'd been racing a 1962 Dodge with a Stage 3 max wedge engine and doing well enough to get noticed. More importantly, Addison's boss, Ted Speyer, had direct connections to Chrysler's racing program and the Ram Chargers team. Speyer built race engines at his station. He sold performance parts. He understood how to move experimental components without raising questions. This made Addison perfect. He had access to parts through Speyer, he had the skills to assemble them, and he had the credibility to race on Woodward without people assuming Chrysler was involved. In early 1969, Chrysler sold Addison a 1967 Plymouth Belvedere GTX for $1. The car had started life as a test mule for the factory racing department. Originally blue with a 440 cubic inch engine, it had been used to evaluate different camshafts, carburetors, intake manifolds, and exhaust systems. After the testing program ended, most cars like this were destroyed. Chrysler didn't want experimental hardware leaking into competitor hands, but this one was different. It became the foundation for something else entirely. The first step was weight reduction. A stock 1967 Plymouth GTX with a Hemi and automatic transmission weighed around 3,900 pounds. That's heavy for a street racer. Addison stripped it. The factory steel doors, hood, fenders, and trunk lid were replaced with fiberglass pieces. The heavy bucket seats came out. In their place went lightweight seats from a Dodge A100 van. The back seat was removed entirely. Sound deadening, insulation, even the factory bumpers eventually came off. The final weight was around 3,200 pounds. That's 700 pounds lighter than stock. Then came the engine. The stock 440 was pulled. In its place went a 426 Hemi, but not a production version. This engine was built with parts that didn't exist in any dealer catalog, parts that Chrysler's racing department had developed for competition but never released to the public. The math is simple. The stock 426 Hemi had a 3.75-inch stroke. Addison's engine had a 4.25-inch stroke. That half-inch difference increased the displacement from 426 cubic inches to 487. That's 61 more cubic inches of capacity to burn fuel and make power. The exhaust ran through hooker headers. These were tubular steel pipes that carried exhaust away from each cylinder individually before merging into collectors. Headers reduce back pressure compared to stock cast iron manifolds, which helps the engine breathe and make more power. The headers fed into 3-inch exhaust pipes. Bigger pipes flow more volume with less restriction. And here's where Addison made his smartest decision. Most street racers wanted their cars loud. Loud meant powerful. Loud meant intimidating. Loud meant people would clear out of the way. But loud also attracts attention. Cops notice loud. Competitors hear loud from blocks away and know you're coming. Residents complain about loud, and then cops start patrolling looking for you. Addison installed 4 1968 Cadillac mufflers. These were massive. Each one was nearly 3 feet long and designed to muffle a big luxury car's V8 while maintaining smooth power delivery. 4 of them absorbed so much sound that at idle, the Silver Bullet didn't sound like a race car. It sounded like an industrial air compressor, a low pneumatic rumble that didn't register as threatening. You could drive it through a residential neighborhood at 2 a.m. without waking anyone up. You could idle at a stoplight next to a cop without raising suspicion. Then you'd hit the throttle and the car would vanish. By the time the other driver realized what happened, the Silver Bullet would be 3 car lengths ahead and pulling away. The final piece was the transmission, a modified torque flight 3-speed automatic. Automatics were slower than 4-speed manuals in professional drag racing, but on the street they had advantages. Easier to drive in traffic, no risk of missing a shift, and with the right tuning still quick enough to win. The completed car made well over 650 horsepower. The quarter-mile time was 10.50 seconds at 132 miles per hour. In full street trim, through 4 mufflers, on pump gas available at any station. For context, a stock 1967 Hemi GTX ran low 14-second quarter miles. The Silver Bullet was 4 seconds quicker. 4 seconds doesn't sound like much until you understand what it means. At the finish line, the Silver Bullet would be 300 feet ahead. That's not racing, that's humiliation. Addison painted the car silver. Someone at the station, Terry Cook, watched him test it one day and said it looked like a silver bullet being fired from a gun, and the name Silver Bullet got stuck. Word spread fast. The Silver Bullet appeared on Woodward on Thursday nights, parked outside the Sunoco station during the day. At first, people assumed it was just another modified Plymouth, until Addison started racing it. He was careful about who he raced and when. No point running against cars that couldn't put up a fight. No point racing when cops were watching. He picked his spots, and he never lost. The car's reputation grew. Challengers came from across Michigan, then from surrounding states, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania. None of them won. Eventually, car magazines started writing about it. In September 1971, Carcraft magazine published an article calling it the Silver Bullet, and so the name became official. Stories spread about a proposed match race between Addison and Big Willie Robinson, head of the LA Street Racers. Robinson drove a Hemi-powered Dodge Daytona. The race was supposed to happen somewhere in the Midwest, organized by Terry Cook halfway between Detroit and California. It never happened. Years later, Addison said he would have won anyway. Robinson's car was heavier and the Hemi was a stock 426 compared to the Silver Bullet's stroked 487. By the early 1970s, the Silver Bullet had become more than a car. It was proof of concept. Chrysler had built a street machine that dominated everything Ford and GM could field. They'd done it without official factory involvement, using a mechanic as the driver instead of a professional racer. The strategy worked. Young buyers saw the Silver Bullet winning and associated that performance with Chrysler products. Dealers sold more Hemis. The company's performance reputation improved, but street racing couldn't last forever. In 1975, Addison sold the Silver Bullet to a racer named Al Kraft for $5,000. Kraft wanted to be the new king of Woodward. He got the car, he got the reputation. For about 2 months, then he blew the transmission. Racing a car like the Silver Bullet requires understanding how to manage 700 horsepower and 3,200 pounds. Kraft didn't have that understanding. He parked the car. Eventually, he sold the drivetrain to a young mechanic named Manuel Carcho, who planned to use the parts in his own build. The engine, transmission, headers, shifter, gauges, tachometer, and radiator all went into storage. The body of the Silver Bullet changed hands several times over the next 2 decades. Each owner did less with it than the last. By the 1990s, it was in rough shape, sitting in a garage, no engine, paint faded, interior deteriorating. Most people had forgotten about it, but one person hadn't. Harold Sullivan grew up around Woodward Avenue in the 1960s. As a teenager just out of high school, he owned a 1967 GTX with a stock 440 engine. Not a Hemi, just the regular high-performance engine that normal people could afford. He raced it on Woodward like everyone else, fast enough to beat most cars, not fast enough to beat the Silver Bullet. Nobody was. Sullivan used to hang around Ted Spare's Sunoco station during the day just to look at Addison's car. He'd stare at the silver paint, the subtle hood scoop, the wide tires barely hidden under the rear fenders. He'd imagine what it must feel like to drive something that dominant. Every time Addison would notice him standing there, walk over and chase him away. Years passed. The street racing scene on Woodward faded as Detroit's economy collapsed in the 1970s. Muscle cars became relics of a different era. Gas prices skyrocketed. Insurance companies crushed the market for high-performance vehicles. The Thursday night races stopped happening. The silver bullet disappeared. But Sullivan never stopped thinking about it. He became a dedicated Mopar collector. He bought classic Chrysler muscle cars. He restored them. He learned everything about how they were built and what made them special. His collection grew. Superbirds, Daytonas, Hemi-powered cars that most people only see in museums. But the silver bullet was the one he wanted most. He kept track of it, quietly, patiently. He'd hear rumors about where it was, who owned it, what condition it was in. Most of the rumors were wrong, but enough of them were right that he could piece together the car's path through different owners. By the early 1990s, he knew exactly where it was, sitting in a garage, no engine, paint faded, interior falling apart, owned by someone who didn't fully understand what he had. Sullivan approached the owner, made an offer. The owner said no. He approached again a year later. Still no. This went on for years. Sullivan would make offers. The owner would refuse. Not because the money wasn't good, just because he wasn't ready to let it go, even though he wasn't doing anything with it. Then, in 1994, the owner changed his mind. But he didn't want cash. He wanted a trade. For one specific car. He'd trade the silver bullet for a specific car, a 1970 Plymouth Superbird. Petty blue paint, white interior, 4-speed transmission, 6-barrel carburetor setup. No cash, straight trade. The problem was that Superbirds with those exact specifications were rare. Sullivan spent a year searching. He placed ads in national car magazines. He contacted collectors. He followed leads across the country. Finally, he found one in Kentucky. Pristine condition, original paint. Everything matched the requirements. He made the trade. When Sullivan got the silver bullet, it was in worse shape than he expected. No engine, bodywork needed, interior shot, but it was authentic. The original car, the king of Woodward. He took it to restore Jeff Rafe and began a complete ground-up rebuild. The goal was to return the car to its 1970 appearance, how it looked when it was dominating Woodward. The restoration took years. Every detail mattered. The correct Traeger S/S wheels, the small hood scoop, the silver paint applied by Vance Cummins, the 4 Cadillac mufflers, the wide rear tires stuffed under the flared quarter panels. The engine was rebuilt to the same 487 cubic inch specification Addison had used. Aluminum heads, stroker crank, TRW pistons, racer brown cam, twin Hollies, the works. Sullivan made some updates for reliability. Modern Dart aluminum heads instead of the troublesome original A990 pieces. Slightly different internal components to handle modern fuel, but externally it looked exactly as it had in 1970. In 2008, Sullivan brought the restored silver bullet to the Woodward Dream Cruise. The annual event draws over 1 million people to Woodward Avenue to celebrate Detroit's car culture. The silver bullet created a crowd wherever it parked. People who'd seen it race decades ago. People who'd only heard the stories. People who'd never heard of it but could tell from the reaction that this was something special. Sullivan also built a second car, the Silver Bullet 2, an identical twin. That way he could race the replica hard without risking damage to the original. Both cars run 10-second quarter miles, just like the original did 50 years ago. Sullivan did one more thing that mattered more than the restoration. He found Jimmy Addison. In 2008, at Milan Dragway in Michigan, Sullivan brought Addison to the track and put him behind the wheel of the restored Silver Bullet. Addison was in his 70s by then. Decades had passed since he'd driven the car in competition, but he got in, fired it up, and made a pass down the quarter mile. One last run in the car that made him a legend. Today, the Silver Bullet sits in Sullivan's collection in Michigan. it still runs. It still races occasionally at events like the Woodward Dream Cruise. If you enjoyed this video and want to see another just like it, be sure to subscribe to our channel now. With that, thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.